Good morning, everybody. I'm Love Coach Scott Katamas, and it is the Sacred Sunday Show on November 28th, 2021. Very special day. And we have a really perfect show for today. It was 400 years ago, 1621, that the event took place between the Pilgrims and the local native tribe that led to our celebration of Thanksgiving. And we've got the perfect guests. We've got Connie and Andrew, and I'm going to add them so you can see them right now. They are two of our dearest friends, a big part of the Global Peace Tribe. And Connie is a direct descendant of the Pilgrims. And Andrew is a more modern pilgrim. He came over from England in a more modern time. But he's also a scholar who has really studied what took place. And we're also going to hear from a Native American woman named Barbara who has both ancestries. She is a woman who walks in both worlds, in that she has the ancestry to the Pilgrims and the ancestry to the Indigenous tribe. And we're going to learn all about the original spiritual intention of the Pilgrims and of that first meeting, and how we can reclaim it today. So, welcome, Connie and Andrew. It's great to have you with us. And as always, I want to welcome all of our friends in the Zoom room. And I see a lot of our regulars are with us. Hello, Dia, Turley, Kent, Susan, Wanda, Linda. As always, let us know your geographic location. It's always fun to see that. And I want to welcome people watching on Facebook. And I especially want to welcome the majority of the people who will watch this show, which is the replay, where it will live forever on Facebook. It'll live forever in our YouTube channel. So whenever you're watching this, whether it's live today or sometime in the future, welcome. Connie, just before we went on, you were talking about, and I don't remember the word, the three variations. I would love for you to share with us, because that's a good starting point.
Okay, well, it's a big part of our work, and it has to do with the three great syntheses between Europeans and the American Indian. And we feel that we're going into the third great synthesis now, with this pandemic that has brought us together, with the climate crisis that has brought us together with the Indigenous people, that we're opening our hearts and our minds to them. The first great synthesis was in Plymouth, and with this meeting in 1621 that formed a peace treaty. And then we had this 3-day harvest celebration and 54 years of peace and friendship. That's extraordinary exception to the human condition then and now, that these cultures came together. And then the second great synthesis was when the drafters of the Constitution were in consultation with the Iroquois chiefs, the Iroquois Confederacy chiefs, who brought the great law, aspects of the great law, into the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. So that's our thesis. We're here to show the role Indigenous peoples have played in the evolution of consciousness. And this is a boots on the ground example, this 54 years, this birth of the American mind. The American mind is different from the European mind by the time the Constitution was being drafted. So, and it has to do with our coming together with the Native people. And it's just very exciting what's going to happen as we come together now, and what we're going to birth on the planet. It's my understanding we're going to birth something that's never been on the planet in the history of the planet. So that's what this is all about for us.
Beautiful. And Andrew, if you could give us just a brief little history lesson of what really took place. And especially, I love if you could share about what the Indigenous people had gone through with their great loss, and of course, what the Pilgrims had gone through and how that brought them together. Because that's a really beautiful part of the story that I didn't know prior to meeting and talking to you this week.
All right, now I'm going to start just with a microsecond about my personal history, because as you mentioned, Scott, I arrived on Thanksgiving of 1969, which is 52 years ago this week. And I actually sailed, and the wind blew me here. And I was coming to Santa Cruz, California, where I'd met a math professor named Ralph Abraham. Some of you listeners, the California friends, may know Ralph. So I just wanted to mention that, which is why, Scott, that's why we first met, because of that original journey that I took from London, where I was living, and came over here. And several decades later, I meet this gorgeous person, and it turns out she's a Mayflower descendant. Now, when I first arrived, of course, I'd heard of Thanksgiving, but I didn't really know what it was. And it was explained to me that it was about turkeys and football. And okay, that was the first take that I got on it. And, that, it wasn't very interesting to me, but there it was. And then getting together with Connie and learning that there is so much misinformation and misbelief on the subject. There's actually a gem at the founding of this nation, a beautiful intercultural human story. That's what today's presentation is about. I've written a novel on the subject. I've done deep studies into it. Yep, there it is, the Mayflower Revelations. And part of the book actually has an agenda.
Hold that up for a moment and look at the size of that.
Yeah, it's pretty fat.
I mean, that is, how long did it take you to write that?
Oh, about 5 years.
But it's wide open. See, it's got short chapters and wide open.
And it's kind of an easy read, because it's these little bits that you just bounce around it. And it's not a boring old period piece, 400 years old. It's absolutely contemporary. It's actually set in Barbados, the island of Barbados, in the year 2020, on the 400th anniversary of the landing of the Mayflower. And I could go and explain why Barbados and so on, but I think we won't go there right now. What I do
let's get to that first coming together, and the beauty of that.
So one of the misbeliefs is that the Pilgrims landed and were welcomed by the Native Americans and housed and fed for that first winter, and they wouldn't have survived had that not happened. Well, none of that is true. They actually met the first Native American on the spring equinox of 1621 this year. And last year, 400 years ago, they landed in a bleak place that they actually thought reminded them of Golgotha. Something horrible, terrible had happened there. What had happened there was an epidemic of plague, of the bubonic plague, that had taken out up to 90% of the local population. And at Patuxent, where they landed, which is now known as Plymouth, Massachusetts, it was pretty much 100%. There were almost none of the immediate local natives. So one of the things I really like to think about and imagine is the emotional state for the week of Thanksgiving here. How much gratitude could you feel landing on this bleak shore in December during a mini ice age? It was terrifying. They came ashore, and during that first winter, the Mayflower passengers lost fully 50% of their people. 102 people and 52 survived that first winter, including Connie's aunt's direct ancestors who passed away, with one exception, her 17-year-old 12 times great grandmother. At the same time, they began to learn that something horrible had happened there. The natives to this day call it the Great Dying. Something horrible had happened. And what that turned out to be was this disease that swept down from the north. It came down and was carried in the context of a war. These warriors in their birch bark canoes had come down, both carrying the disease and in this hand-to-hand combat situation. That is what I believe happened. Whatever it was, and their people thought it was smallpox, and you cannot blame the Mayflower for bringing this disease because it happened several years before the Mayflower arrived. And just imagine the emotional state of the native people, the survivors who they met in the spring of 1621, having lost maybe 90% of their population, and the 51 surviving so-called Mayflower Pilgrims. How much gratitude one would feel for finding friendship and security for both sides. The little group of Pokanoket Native Americans who aligned themselves with the Pilgrims probably had a very intelligent understanding that it would be useful to them for their actual safety and security. They had an enemy tribe just to the south with 3,000 warriors, and they had maybe 90. So imagine the gratitude of that first Thanksgiving of finding solace and comfort and friendship in people from completely other cultures. It's this extraordinary story, Scott. It's amazing.
And what is important also to note is the vibratory level of the leaders. Okay, the spiritual vibration of these leaders. The Massasoit was an extraordinary leader. Okay, we have some documents that show that he was a loving leader. And I can even read you something that from Edward Winslow's journal, that one of his fellow native people were speaking about the Massasoit and how loving he was and how extraordinary he was as a leader. And then the Mayflower Pilgrims, William Bradford, the leader of the Mayflower Pilgrims, the governor, was an extraordinary spiritual man. And these two leaders kept their people in peace. That's 54 years. After their death, and with the next generation coming in, and the vibratory level decreasing with the desire for land and with the pressure of all the people who'd come in, the Puritans who had come into Boston, 30,000 of them in 1630. And then all the rest, the Dutch and the French and the everybody all around, that vibratory level went down, and war replaced diplomacy. Okay, and we can see that now as far as visionary leaders and what goes on right now. So I just want to call our attention to that.
You know, that's very much what we wanted this show to be about today, is like understanding, oh, I should put myself on camera too. Understanding what took place, let's do it this way, hang on a second. Understanding what took place 400 years ago, the real truth of it, which I've learned from you. I've learned so much just in preparing for this show. But then here we are at this incredible time of pandemic, at this incredible time in human history where I think most of us recognize, okay, humanity has to radically change. And so there's a commonality between 400 years ago and now. And you've helped me actually in prepping for this show to talk about that. And that's, to me, very powerful and very, very extraordinary, actually. So share with us a little bit more about your understanding of that original spiritual intention of the Pilgrims, and leaving England and committing to a great change, and then that original connection of wanting to harmonize with the native wisdom, and how that relates to where we are today and what we need to do today.
Well, for me, it's extraordinary who these pilgrims were. Right now, we just have them as pilgrims. We don't understand who they were and what their intentions were and their actions were. In England in the 1500s, the Bible had been translated into English and mass produced. So they could have it on their dining room table. And what these were pastors in the church. These were highly educated people from Cambridge University. And they saw that the Bible, that God intended for us to live in direct connection to the divine, to our divinity. And so they had to separate from the Church of England to do that. It was against the law to separate from the church, to not go to the church. So it was treasonous for them to form their own church, which they did with a covenant between themselves and the divine. And this is the basis of the congregational church, where people come together and the congregation gets to make the decisions, because the congregation is acting more in alignment with the divine. So they had to leave England and they had to go to Holland, where there was religious freedom. Okay, but this puts it in the context of they were religious fanatics. But what people don't understand is they were seeking the same thing that the Native Americans and the indigenous peoples are seeking today. And that is freedom of religion, freedom to relate directly to the divine, freedom to have your own way of being and your own relationship to the sacred. And so once people recognize that the alignment, the spiritual alignment of these separatists, these pilgrims, these moms, dads, and kids who stood up to the King of England for humanity's sake and actually laid down the basis of democracy in a little document that they wrote in the cabin of the Mayflower before they landed, which is called the Mayflower Compact. And it's the first document of democracy from the Western world, other than the Magna Carta that only lasted like 6 weeks or so. But there are aspects of the Magna Carta that are still alive. But still, this Mayflower Compact that they drafted in the cabin of the Mayflower drove their behavior for their time, the Plymouth colony, and brought them into this alignment with the native people whom they met in that spring. So I just think it's key for us to look at intent, which is what you're saying. Okay, what is the intent? And so it's just key that this is the spiritual beginnings of this nation. The alignment with the Native Americans, this first great synthesis with 54 years of peace and friendship.
Beautiful. Thank you. And I want to invite our audience to ask questions or to comment, and I'll read them. And Wanda from Texas had an opening comment, which was that she also was from Texas, thought that Thanksgiving was all about Dallas Cowboy football and turkey, but Dallas Cowboy football would be the... But then on a little bit more of a serious note, she says, she points out what, emphasizing what you pointed out, we think that the COVID pandemic is terrible. I mean, most of us have known somebody who's died, or we certainly know people who've gotten sick, but not half of our country, not half of our population. So that's just in the first year. I mean, you can only imagine how, you make this big choice and half the people die in the first year. I mean, I don't think any of us can really fully comprehend what that must have been like. But Wanda does ask a question. She asks, do you think it was war or ego that replaced diplomacy? War or ego, or was it both?
Well, there was a war. I mean, the natives declared war on the colonists. They came and burned houses and killed the women and children and did the whole thing. And it began this war. And so whether it was ego that drove the war, I don't think it has to do with ego. It has to do with loss of land, of culture, the pressures on the native people by then, with all the people who had come by 1675. This pilgrim story, we're talking 1620, we're talking 54 years of multiple generations. And also it has to do with the scientific paradigm that had been born at that same time in Europe. And Andrew can speak to that. And I feel that scientific paradigm that separated us from our hearts, from the rest of creation, is the root cause, ultimately, of this behavior that we're now suffering from today, that we're actually being taken out of by this pandemic, by circumstance, by the energies on the planet now. So Andrew, do you want to speak to that scientific paradigm?
Okay, so what's really interesting here is this huge thing that happened. It was the beginning of the transition from absolute monarchy. If you grew up in Europe, anytime from medieval times until the present, you had a king. I'm English, we have a queen, right? It was just assumed that that's the way God put things in place, and that's the way it was, and the church supported that. And after Henry VIII, the King of England or the Queen of England was actually the head of the Anglican or Church of England church. And in those days, if you didn't attend church, it was compulsory, you were in trouble. And you were answerable to the king. And if you did what the Pilgrims did, you actually were committing treason. You actually could be put to death for that. Wow. So it was extraordinary courage on their part. But it's exactly that same time we have René Descartes in France. And we have in 1643, we have Isaac Newton being born. So it was that time of the whole scientific shift, the whole shift from monarchy to democracy. Back then, we probably couldn't even imagine that change was happening. Well, those changes were happening, but they happened in the same period among that European community as the European diaspora spread out across the planet. And as Connie just said, more and more as the reductionist worldview, scientific worldview was adopted, and basically the older church-based religious worldviews were abandoned, we found ourselves more and more separated from spirits and from each other.
Wow. Okay. So I want to bring in the other person who is going to join us today, which is Barbara. And let me pause. I've got her video about to play. So tell us a little bit about who Barbara is. We're going to see a video from Barbara in just a moment. Tell us a little bit about, maybe introduce to our audience who we're about to meet with Barbara.
Well, Barbara Mary Kurfis is a clan grandmother of the Pokanoket tribe. And she is also descended from Stephen Hopkins, a Mayflower passenger. So she's carrying both those spirits. She's carrying that oneness, that coming together within her being. And she exudes it with the love that she has for all of humanity and her vision of us coming together in the future. So it's been very exciting to connect with her and to come forward through Zoom to the world with her vision, with her heart, with her spirit, with her extraordinary ancestral history. And
you mentioned that she's a Pokanoket grandmother. I just want to be sure everybody knows that word, Pokanoket. That was the name of the tribe, the group that the Mayflower Pilgrims connected with on the spring equinox of 1621. And Barbara is a descendant of those folks who are now kind of emerging. They were suppressed, repressed, I think. They were pushed back. And they're coming out now I'm just thrilled to see them stepping up right now this year. It's wonderful to see.
Yeah, they were suppressed after King Philip's War. They were suppressed. They were killed on sight because they started. Metacom, who was King Philip, was a Pokanoket, as was the Massasoit, who was the peacemaker. But we're talking the next generation. His son declared war on the Pilgrims, on the settlers. So there's that dichotomy of that great peacemaker and that war person who stepped up and caused the bloodiest war on the soil of the Turtle Island to that time and since, or maybe not before.
So I want to get back to the introduction of Barbara, though. But thank you for that. I know there's so much history. I mean,
a little background on Barbara's tribe there. Yeah.
So thank you very, very much. So let's meet Barbara. This is a 5-minute video where she tells her story. And we're going to do a little prayer and tells her story.
I am so honored to be with Andrew and Connie and Barbara. And we are going to learn a lot today about the true history of 400 years ago from an incredible woman who walks in both worlds, comes from both Indigenous Native American culture and also from European culture, and has a love and an honoring of both. So Barbara, would you be willing to start us off with a prayer? And then we are eager to hear your truth, to hear your story.
Certainly. First, I'd like to, we start off in prayer, we honor the 4 directions. And let me find my stuff here. We pray to the north because the Creator sits in the north, and the north is the beginning of where he comes from. So I can't, my fire alarm will go off, so I'm going to take tobacco and I'm going to offer it to the north, then to the east. East is over here. Then I'm going to offer it to the south, and then to the west, and then to my heart, and then to Mother Earth. Creator, let us pray for the Great Spirit to guide us through the difficult times, to keep our mind in the right frame. Father, keep our eyes straight and open to the truth. Father, keep our mouth to speak of only good and love. Father, keep our heart strong, but full of warmth and love to comfort the sick. Amen. Aho.
Aho. Barbara, tell us about your connection to your ancestors and anything you'd like for us to know about the true history, not not what we read in school, but the true history of your people.
What I was told by my elders and what I was shown in vision is that my people were here. I'm a descendant of Massasoit's brother, Quadaquina. And I have other descendants that are members of the tribe from him as well. When I was 10, my grandmother told me about my native history, and we were at that time we were learning it in school. And the teacher said everybody was killed. There was no natives left. So I went home to my grandmother. I said, "How come I'm still here?" You know. But as time went on, I got fascinated with the history and with my grandfather because I thought we were part black because of what my grandfather looked like. So my grandmother laughed. She said, "No, you're native. You're a native from." She said, "I'm not sure of the tribe." So as I got older, I started researching, and I told my sister, my older sister, what my grandmother told me. So I contacted Boston Indian Affairs, and they told me what to do. And they told me to go to the powwows of the people. I didn't know what band I belonged to. I just knew I was Wampanoag. But as I went to the powwows, one day, a woman came running up to me. She says, "They're looking for you. They're looking for you." I said, "Who's looking for me?" You know, what did I do? And they said, "No, they're looking for you. Your tribe is looking for you. You're the Bears woman." See, my surname is Bears. And so they wanted to find the lost families of Massasoit, and I'm one of the lost families of Massasoit. And my tribe accepted me in, and one day I got a call from the Sagamore. He says, "You know more than any of the women in my in my tribe, and I want you to be the clan grandmother. And I told him, I don't think I'm worthy of that because I don't really think I know enough.
Hmm. Oh, that ended quicker than I thought. What a wonderful introduction, first of all. What's it been like for you, Connie, interacting with her? Because you've had a fair amount of interaction with her, as descendants, and of course she's in both worlds. How's that been for you? You muted.
Yeah, well, it's been a real treat and really inspiring. And as I mentioned before, it's really been exciting to have the Pokanoket voice come forward in this loving way, looking toward peace and using this time as an inspiring time of our coming together, because it's all a matter of perspective, where we look, how we see things, where we put our attention, what vibration we're coming from, how we see these historical times. And so it's just really exciting because I've seen this spiritual alignment for decades. Because, for one thing, I live a spirit guided life. So I could see in the pilgrims, when I studied their history, and we've been there. We've been to Scrooby, England. We've been to Cambridge. We've been to Leiden, Holland, because we wanted to find out who these people truly were. And I saw this spiritual alignment with my life, and as well as the native way, that whole native thing of going on the hill and crying for a dream, that vision quest, that you're looking for your instructions from the divine. And also just the native way of, okay, I'll be at that meeting if I'm supposed to be. It's that commitment to the divine, to our impulses, to our highest inner promptings, we call it. That's where the world will come into balance. And so when I saw that with the pilgrims, and I saw that with the native people, because I've spent 30 years with visionary native elders, and I saw through them this, what I call the true nature of the universe, this connection to the sacredness and oneness of all life that leads to a completely different reality. Once we embrace it, once we get over that separation from our hearts, from our spirits, from the rest of creation that we were put in with this little box of the reductionist scientific paradigm. So I'm just saying that because Barbara embraces and embodies that love of where we're going, and to have it come from a Pokanoket, from this time in our history, where we can put it into a concrete example of its unfolding, is very exciting for me.
Yeah. Well, beautifully stated. Thank you. And that's why I was so excited about doing this show with both of you and with Barbara, because it really is. I mean, first of all, the timing is fascinating. You know, it's Thanksgiving time. It's exactly 400 years. And so to know what really happened, the historical context that you're providing, but then to bring it into present time as we face a pandemic, as we face this, new emergence of where we have to go in humanity. And I've always believed that if we had taken the best of Western culture and the best of Indigenous culture and brought them together, what an extraordinary country we would have, what an extraordinary world we would be living in. But instead, we exterminated, or did our best through genocide, to destroy the indigenous cultures, and went completely out of balance with all the not so good things about Western culture. And hopefully we can correct that imbalance in time. Question. Uh, Wanda writes, I view this as intimate history. It goes beyond textbook history. Absolutely. That's a beautiful way of putting it, Wanda. Intimate history. So, go ahead.
Well, I just want to say that the whole human race was doing really crummy things to each other, have been through the millennia. That at this point, it seems to be demonizing the white race for all the horrible things that have happened to the native people, which is absolutely true and unconscionable. One thing we have to realize is that the native people were doing horrible things to each other before we got here. And that the yellow people and the black people, all people have been doing nasty things to each other. So it's a time of coming forward out of that frequency, that low frequency of fear, separation, and scarcity. You know, those three words kind of summarize it. But now we're coming out of that. The earth is moving into a higher frequency. So, and the heart is opening and we're coming together. So that's just so exciting, but it's just really important to get the playing field even, to know that all races were affected by that lower frequency energy.
Oh, thank you. That's a beautiful point. Because we do, for so long, we demonized Native Americans. Then we kind of went through the dances with wolves phase where we kind of, the pendulum swung in the opposite direction and, we went into the noble savage, phase and then seeing them as more enlightened. And, but it's true. My understanding of history is that what white people did to indigenous, especially in all the broken treaties, is horrific. But the indigenous people had a long history of being quite savage and barbaric with each other also. So, Andrew, and here's a lovely, a beautiful message from Dia, one of our regulars. Dia writes, Connie, I'm in rapt attention and awe with what you're expressing. Thank you. My spirit is aligned with you, my sister. Then she continues on, you two are speaking profundities.
Oh, thank you, dear.
Wow.
Dia's
Let's stay in touch, dear Dia.
And
We
Wanda,
love you and thank you
yes,
for that.
we did exploit, this is from Wanda, we exploited the indigenous culture and we still are, and that is sadly true. I have a question for you then, Andrew. As a scholar who understands history and as a spiritually based human being who understands what needs to happen, what is your take? Do you trust that humanity can evolve fast enough from a long history of being savage, of being in the lower vibration? Can we evolve fast enough?
Well, firstly, Scott, I would say that we have been both savage and saintly. We are the most confusing of species. We are angelic, we are wonderful, we are Beethoven and Leonardo and on and on and on. And at the same time, we're Hitler and some others I won't name. So we are an interesting work in progress. And I believe truly with Barbara Marx Hubbard, for example, that we are in the midst of an evolutionary process that we can look back in history. Right now, we're looking back 400 years at an inspiring time where people came together and did not devolve into bloodshed. They united, they lived together, they worked together, they played together, and ultimately they intermarried. And most of the people in New England have native blood, and most of the natives have white blood, as we now know, of course. So we found each other in family context and community context. So that was a time of political and social evolution. And of course, that always is accompanied by spiritual inner individual evolution. So yes, I do, but I think the jury is out. I'm not claiming I'm a prophet, that I know what's going to happen, but I do know that we have potential. We humans have potential we have yet to manifest. And you were talking about healing the imbalance a moment ago, Scott, and that's exactly what Connie is talking about with regard to the third great synthesis. If we can And it seems to be happening. I'm seeing the signs. Connie and I have been together for 18 years, and she was telling me this that long ago. And I was saying, okay, but where is it? Where's the evidence? And we are seeing it. We truly are seeing it. For example, on our Unity Earth group that I know you're involved with, Scott, and the Indigenous friends who come on there, there's an emergence, there's a coming out. It's time. We must come out because the Indigenous people have something so important for us as Westerners and for us as humans, as Homo sapiens. We need everyone and everything. Nobody is extraneous. We must unite and open our hearts. And if we do that, we have a very good chance of restoring the balance of this beautiful, beautiful, one-of-a-kind planet. Something like that.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for, I really appreciate how balanced your presentation is. And you're right. We're spiritual beings having a human experience. And within that human experience, my gosh, it is so varied. And so thank you for your balanced. Noel writes, it would be interesting to do a census of how many Americans have indigenous roots. Most people I've asked this question to have answered yes. And certainly the answer on Noel's side is yes. Both of his grandmothers are half indigenous. So that's a good point. I'm going to go back to another video clip from Barbara, since we are in Thanksgiving weekend, where she's going to talk a little bit about that original 3-day feast. And I think it's wonderful hearing it from someone who is a woman who walks in both worlds from both sides. So we're going to go back to Barbara for 3 minutes here.
Please do tell us.
There's no sound.
I overheard you say there's a sound problem. You're muted. Here,
There's no sound.
Hang on. Good.
Let's try again. I'm going to optimize it. So this shouldn't boost it.
Tell us about those 3 days and what took place.
Okay, what's been handed down to me and what I've read is that the Pilgrims were celebrating their first harvest, and it was called the feast. And Squanto, one of our people, helped them, showed them how to plant corn and plant different things so they could be able to live and survive. So they were celebrating their harvest. And we also celebrate a harvest. So during that celebration they were having, they also had a military salute or exercise with their guns on to celebrate, I guess. I don't know that much about that, except that we had signed a treaty with them that if anybody would harm them or us, we would come to their aid. So hearing the guns going off, this is what I was told. We sent braves. We sent our war party thinking that there was something happening. And when our war party got there, we saw that they were having a feast. And it wasn't a threat, it was a good thing. So then we signaled back to our people and we all came together and joined the feast. My ancestor came, Massasoit came with his family. The braves brought their wives and their children, and those poor 4 women that had to do the cooking and the teenagers that were there, the helping. Oh boy, 140 some odd people they had to cook for. So it turned out to be a 3-day thing. And it turned into the first Thanksgiving, which is a holiday that is celebrated as a holiday now today. That's how it started.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It's, again, wonderful to hear the real truth. Thank you so much.
We have is it
Yeah.
unmuted? Scott, we have an original writing from that time written by Edward Winslow that is the only extant account from the Pilgrim side, and it was published in London in 1622 or 23. And we still have that, and we could actually read that if you liked.
Yes, I would love for you to read that. That would be
How
really
about
fun.
that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the little paragraph. Our harvest being gotten in, our governor sent 4 men on fowling, that so we might, after a special manner, rejoice together after we had gathered in the fruit of our labors. They 4 in one day killed as much fowl as, with a little help beside, served the company almost a week. At which time, among other recreations, we exercised our arms, many of the Indians coming amongst us, and among the rest, their greatest king, Massasoit, with some 90 men, whom for 3 days we entertained and feasted, and they went out and killed 5 deer, which they brought to the plantation and bestowed upon our governor and upon the captain and others. And although it not be always so plentiful as it was at this time with us, yet by the goodness of God, we are so far from want that we often wish you partakers of our plenty.
So as you can see, that's written like a letter home.
Yeah.
It was published, and there's an element of the desire to encourage others to come over and join them, obviously. Do you know how many, at that spring equinox when they first met the natives, do you know how many pilgrims there were? I mentioned that there were 51 or 52. And what their breakdown was, there were 14 adult men, 14, 1-4. There were 4 adult women, and there were 34 children. And they're often described as an invading army. Well, that's not much of an army. You can do a lot of damage with that few people.
One of those children was my ancestor, Priscilla Mullins, who
Right.
married John Alden, and they had 11 kids, and they're known as America's first couple. And what I want to do is finish this because it's very interesting what the next paragraph says.
Mhm.
We have found the Indians very faithful in their covenant of peace with us, very loving and ready to pleasure us. We often go to them and they come to us. Some of us have been 50 miles by land in the country with them. The occasions and relations whereof you shall understand by our general and more full declaration of such things as are worth the noting. Yea, it hath pleased God so to possess the Indians with a fear of us and love unto us, that not only the greatest king amongst them called Massasoit, but also all the princes and peoples round about us have either made suit unto us or been glad of any occasion to make peace with us, so that 7 of them at once have sent their messengers to us to that end. Yea, an island at sea, which we never saw, hath also, together with the former, yielded willingly to be under the protection and subjects of our sovereign Lord King James, so that there is now great peace amongst the Indians themselves, which was not formerly, neither would have been but for us. And we, for our parts, walk as peaceably and safely in the woods as in the highways in England. We entertain them familiarly in our houses, and they as friendly, bestowing their venison on us.
Yeah,
That's pretty extraordinary.
That is really, really beautiful. Wow.
That's a real testament to this friendship and to this interaction, that they came and went with into each other's homes and lives.
And the previously warring tribes moved into a peaceful coexistence to this day.
Hmm.
Mm.
So two things. Noel goes, wow, 34 kids and 4 women. And I have to say again, that's a fascinating piece of the history. I certainly didn't know. Was it that the 50% that died, were they mostly adults, or did they actually come over with mostly children?
A lot of the ones who died were the women. As I understand it, a significant percentage of the 50 who died were women.
Because they were doing the caretaking, I'm sure.
There's that. Yeah.
And this was a general sickness. This was scurvy. This was, it never says really, but it was scurvy, and they came during an ice age, a mini ice age. They had to walk from the shallop to the land through the water, wade through the water whenever they came and went from the Mayflower. So it's an extraordinary situation of just being weak, and some think that it had to do with unfamiliar organisms in the water.
And I've discovered, I've learned something else on that subject. Okay, so you go to another place. Ever been to Mexico and Montezuma's got his revenge on you? Right. So possibly something like that. If you were malnourished, you were sick, you were cold, and you had scurvy, and then you had that kind of situation that, obviously that was terminal in many cases. And here's the point. I found a number of other early colonies that were successful, but they lost also 50% of their people that first winter.
Wow.
So, okay. So I think it had to do with not having penicillin and the kinds of, remedies we have today, and coming from one biome that you're accustomed to, that your body's used to, and you drink the local water and you're in trouble. So,
and they'd spent 66 days at sea, and we were just on the Mayflower. It was a cargo ship originally, and I didn't realize it, but the between decks, they had to stay between decks, meaning they never went up to the top.
You never
deck.
went up, you never got the sun,
So
you never
102 people were
crammed into this tiny space.
With I don't know, where did they keep their cows and their dogs? And
there too.
I mean, it's astounding.
Yeah. They had their livestock and themselves, and the shallop, the boat that would eventually take them ashore and so on, that had been cut into 4 pieces and stowed down there to be reassembled on arrival. And the lucky families actually got to be up above, whatever the wetness and whatever might be going on the floor. So you're in there packed with your chickens and your pigs, and there were at least 2 large dogs, and no sanitation. Ooh. Tough.
And these were former pastors of the Church of England. These were, they had lived in Holland for 12 years. They were tradesmen. They weren't allowed to go above, in the guild system, but they spoke at the university. They debated at the university there. I mean, it's an extraordinary story that we can take heart from and inspiration from today, as we're feeling put upon by the government and all that stuff. These folks stood up and put their lives on the line for it.
This is fascinating. I love history, and this is just like such a fascinating history, and it's impossible to imagine spending that much time in that crammed a space without support, and you can only imagine the disease of all the feces, and God knows what they were eating.
My ancestor was the cooper. He was John Alden was the cooper who had to keep the barrels, because they had they never drank water because the water in England was not potable. So they drank beer and wine just beer.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I was astounded to find out that they couldn't go above decks.
Yeah. And by the way,
they didn't drink water?
They did not drink water. Now, once they landed and they were out of beer, they had to drink water. And that's the wonderful thing about beer aside from its intoxicating factor, is that it's sterile. It doesn't, microorganisms do not grow in beer. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Now,
And they
I-
knew that. They
doing this
knew that. So
alcoholic beer.
it would be an alcoholic beer, yes.
Hang on. So they were, including the children, were all living on alcoholic beer for 102 days?
For 66 days at sea.
66 days?
Yeah.
So they were all drunk all the time.
Well, life's intoxicating sometimes. What are you going to do?
Well, who knows how it, I mean, because there's different levels of beer.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's,
It probably wasn't highly intoxicating unless you really drank a lot.
I mean, I guess one could look into that and see what that was all about.
This is really, I mean, this is fascinating. All right. I want to read a few comments and then we're going to wrap up with Barbara's song. Dora Lee writes, I love you too. I've missed you. Peace, harmony, and kindness. How beautiful. This is just what is coming forth today and needed in its own time. So thank you, Dora Lee. Dia writes, kids in school, if presented with this most beautiful story, would be excited that it would hold their attention. And Dora Lee continues, there's so much wisdom left behind. Wake up. Remember who you really are, people of the earth. Dora Lee, I love your enthusiasm. Mm-hmm. And then Dia has a question. Is the Howland indentured servant going up on deck for air and blown overboard and now having 2 million descendants?
Right. Don't know. Don't know why he was on deck. He wasn't supposed to be up there, and he did, and he was swept overboard. And it's an utter miracle that he survived. He managed to grab a trailing rope sheet that was trailing behind the vessel and hang on to it, and they hauled him back aboard, which is crazy.
Lots of miracles.
In the middle of the Atlantic, in the middle of this wild storm. I mean, they probably were in the middle of a hurricane, quite honestly. And by the way, Connie just said that we were just on the Mayflower. It was not that original Mayflower. There's a beautiful replica that's just been fully restored, rebuilt, built back in 1959 and just restored. Took 2 years at Mystic Seaport in Connecticut. And she's back at Plymouth for the 400th anniversary celebrations. And we were just aboard her and really got to feel how it must have been. And I can only imagine Connie, whose ancestors were actually on that boat. It's like, it must resonate pretty amazingly.
Yeah. And if we're drawing to a close, I just want to say that we've kind of gone into this Mayflower Pilgrim story, the separatists, those folks. But what we want to also honor and take in and bring into the schools is the Native people.
Yeah.
Who they were, what they brought. See, that's how the story's been out of balance, because the Pilgrims deserve all the accolades they've ever had. Okay, so the country has honored them forever until recent revisionist history has put them, done them dirt. Okay, but what the reason it was out of balance was because we didn't bring in the Indian, except for the Thanksgiving images, the myth of them in headdresses and sitting with the Pilgrims, and we didn't bring in their heart, their spirit, who they are, what they've brought to humanity through who they are, and what their influence on the Pilgrims was. And Betty Booth Donahue, who's written a book called Bradford's Indian Book, is very clear.
She's a Cherokee scholar, by the way.
A Cherokee scholar, and she's very clear in what the Indian influence has been on the American mind and on American literature that carries forth today in its influence that we're not even aware of.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Well, I thought it would be really lovely to conclude. Is there any last thing you want to share just about how people can get Andrew's book, or anything that you want people to know before I'm going to close with Barbara's song.
So that's Andrew's book, and it's available on Amazon. It's available on Amazon and on our website, first50years.us, first50years.us. And you get it from us, and we include some extra goodies. And we also get supported by you in ordering it from us rather than Amazon.
We never see we see a few pennies from Amazon. That's about it. Yeah.
And just also
it's
know,
called the Mayflower Revelations. You Google it, you'll find it.
and also know we have another book called The Trust Frequency, 10 Assumptions for a New Paradigm, because our work has to do with bringing a new paradigm, a new understanding of the nature of the universe to the table, because it's that misunderstanding of reductionist science that has gotten us out of balance. And our book is Indigenous Cosmology, the indigenous understanding of the nature of the universe combined with quantum science, the new science that's proving that we are one. And so the unified physics and quantum science. So this book is a synthesis of the two, because science can't prove the sacredness and oneness of all life. And the native people live in that context of the sacredness and oneness of all our relations, which is the whole cosmos.
Beautiful. So I'm taking people to your website, and everybody, this is first50years.us. Go to www.first50years, and 50 is numeric 50. So it's first spelled FIRST, then numeric 50 years.us. And this is where we go to your book. All about the seeds of freedom, the vision for America.
And that's a film. See, that's our film. We have a film that we've produced that goes with it, that speaks of this synthesis.
Beautiful. All right. Well, I'm learning so much about you two. Thank you. We've got a couple of last questions here. Noel, Dia is thanking you for the answer to her question.
Thank you.
And Noel is asking, what was that, the Bradford Indian?
Bradford's Indian book.
Yeah,
The
I think
Ruth
if
and Rise.
you just Google Bradford's Indian book, you would find it. It's written by a Cherokee scholar who spent a lot of time. She's one of she's a linguist, and she's a serious academic authority on this period of time, and is a real fan of the Pilgrims, and really has a balanced vision, a view of how the interaction was. And she says one of the great tragedies of America is that the Plymouth paradigm, is what she calls it, that the Plymouth paradigm did not prevail. If the Plymouth paradigm had become the overarching governance structure of America, we'd have a very different and much more positive country, and there would have been so much less suffering on all sides.
And she was just on Humanity Rising with us. And I've just put in the chat links to all of our presentations this week, because we've done one at IONS, the Institute of Noetic Sciences, that we do a PowerPoint where we walk people through very logically with a PowerPoint at our IONS presentation. And Betty was with us on Humanity Rising Day 370, just the 24th of November. And I also put in links to our YouTube channel where you can see Betty speaking and lots of people speaking about various subjects on this integration of Indigenous and European thinking.
And just remember the third great synthesis, it's the coming together now of the so-called Indigenous and the so-called non-Indigenous, because honestly, we're all Indigenous. My Indigenous roots go back to the Caucasus, in my pre-Viking days. So we're all Indigenous, our roots are back there, and we have so much to teach each other, to learn from each other, and to do together, working for the future of humanity on this planet.
And as the natives know, we've all had a role to play. Every color has had a role to play in this process. So the good thing is we've all been playing our roles, and now we're at this place with a little help from a pandemic, a global pandemic, to just break down everything that we thought was real, so that the new real beauty of the human heart and systems aligned with that, with all life, can be born and come to pass. But we have to bring them to pass. It's up to us.
Beautiful. For those of you watching on Facebook, I'm going to take all those links that Connie put and post them on Facebook, so you'll be able to get them there. Certainly on the Love Coach Academy version of Facebook. It's my dog, who's no doubt very excited about your books. Uh, and I want to encourage. We've learned a lot today. Um, we've Hey, sorry about that. Jeez.
Okay.
Um, we're going to play Barbara, who did a song for us. And I
Mhm.
want to invite everybody watching, again, whether you're watching live or whether you're watching the replay, to, as we listen, so sorry. And of course, she's going back and forth, between the back deck and the front deck, screaming like crazy. Thank you, Em. My roommate's quieting her down. Here I am
One
trying to set up this great spiritual moment. Okay.
Okay, I want to say one thing, that this necklace that I have was a gift to me from Barbara, because my name is Eagle Woman, and this is an Eagle Woman necklace that she gave me about 10 years ago, and I am wearing it in honor of our relationship.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's beautiful. All right, we're going to listen to Barbara play her song. And I want to invite everybody to drop into what to me is the most important point of it all today. That there was an original spiritual bond as two different cultures came together in peace and in harmony and in sharing their wisdom, sharing the best of their cultures. And that's what we need to do today. So let's integrate that. Let us pray with Barbara, if you will, in your own way, as we listen to her music, or to her song. I was wondering, would you be willing to, Connie and Andrew mentioned that you might sing a song, and that would be just so lovely if that's something you would enjoy sharing with us.
Okay, I'm gonna sing the song I sang yesterday because it's fitting for our event here.
Beautiful, thank you.
It's the humble song. It's a Maliseet song, which I am a little part Maliseet. I'm mixed with other tribes as well. And I'm just going to tell you that Mashomas is grandfather and Nokomis is grandmother in Ojibwe. So that's the only foreign language that's in the song. The rest of it's in English. I'm going to start off with the 4 honor beats. Whoops, I got to put my glasses on. Otherwise I'll mess up. So I'm old, so I'm going, can't see good anymore. Okay, here we go. We gotta humble ourselves in the eyes of the Creator. We gotta bend down low. We gotta humble ourselves in the eyes of our Creator. We gotta know what He knows. We can raise each other up higher and higher. We can raise each other up. We gotta humble ourselves in the eyes of our Mashomas. We gotta bend down low. We gotta humble ourselves in the eyes of our Mashomas. We gotta know what He knows. We can raise each other up higher and higher. We can raise each other up. We gotta humble ourselves in the eyes of our Nokomis. We gotta bend down low. We gotta humble ourselves in the eyes of our Nokomis. We gotta know what she knows. We can raise each other up higher and higher. We can raise each four-legged. Bend down low, we gotta humble ourselves in the eyes of the four-legged. We gotta know what they know. We can raise each other up higher and higher. We can raise each other up. We gotta humble ourselves in the eyes of the swimmers. Gotta bend down low. We gotta humble ourselves in the eyes of the swimmers. We gotta know what they know. We can raise each other up higher and higher. We can raise each other up. We gotta humble ourselves in the eyes of the crawlers. We gotta bend down low. We gotta humble ourselves in the eyes of the crawlers. We gotta know what they know. We can raise each other up higher and higher. We can raise each other up. And we can raise each other up. This was a funeral song. I had to get permission to sing it from the Maliseet and Ojibwe people, but it's a beautiful song. It covers everything, just about except the trees.
Yeah.
And the plants.
That is beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. So let us all be humble and appreciate all of God's creatures, all beings. And remember that we can make any day, any time sacred by choosing to see the divinity in all. So whether you're watching us live, and thank you for everybody who has been watching live, and all of you who will watch the replay, welcome. Thank you, Andrew and Connie, for your wonderful work, for your presence in our world and our great global peace tribe. And I look forward to our next connection. God's blessings, everybody. Have a beautiful, beautiful day.
Thank you, Scott. We're honored to be here with you.
It was really fun. I learned so much. I love that.
Yeah. Thanks, Scott.
And we can all raise each other up. That song is so beautiful.
All raise each other up, even the creepy crawlers.
The
See,
crawlers
Yeah,
and the
crawlers
swimmers,
especially, yeah.
the standing ones, the flying ones. It's so beautiful.
Oh, I'm going to stop chat. There we go.
Are you done?